Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukutali.
And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline Live, although today is a recording. Now then, today we thought we'd bring in a person, a guest, who knows a thing or two about politics. Probably one of Sri Lanka's most formidable politicians in the Mahinda Rajapaksa years of governance, and he's right here with us for the very first time on TV1 at any rate. He's right here. A very good evening to you, Mr. Sajin Vaas Gunawardena.
Good evening, Faraz, and thank you for having me on your show.
It's an absolute pleasure, Mr. Gunawardena, to have you on our program. I really don't know where to start, because as I said, you're one of the most formidable politicians of the Mahinda Rajapaksa governance years, and I dare say that you are known as much as he is to the general public. Now then, have you opted out of politics? Are you still very much in politics?
Well, thank you for that compliment that you made in terms of interpreting me as a formidable personality of that administration. But that again is a matter of interpretation. Answering your question whether I am out of politics, certainly not. I'm very much in it, and times are rough. So many things that are happening around us that keeps changing every day. The goalpost keeps changing every day. Complicated matters, and where one stands in this whole hurricane that is around us, at times even I get confused.
All right, well, shall we just start on the economy, because that's like it's been hit by a huge hurricane. What is your take when we look at the fact that, like the rest of the world, Sri Lanka's economy has been rather hit by COVID-19, by the pandemic, but then on top of that we have the fertilizer issue, the government's desire to almost literally go overnight into an organic or green economy. On top of that, we have the rating agencies that have downgraded us several times, and there is some sort of speculation that Sri Lanka may end up as a defaulter on its ISBs, the international sovereign bonds. Then there is the whole matter of the foreign direct investment attraction, and also, you know, the balance of payment, and eventually the value of money. What's your take on the economy?
Well, Faraz, you summed up the entire economy in less than 20 seconds. It's a tall order. But I think answering your question in a very structured manner, I think it's prudent for me to go back a little bit. Now, what you are speaking in the context of between, I would say perhaps 2020, 2019, 2020, 2021.
Indeed.
But if I may take your memory back to the era between 2005 to 2015, when I was very much part of that administration, the period 2005 to 2010, we had the war with the LTTE, and that was the more focal point of our entire nation, and quite rightfully. And the administration of His Excellency Mahinda Rajapaksa, the president then, they successfully concluded that. But then the saga starts after 2010 to 2015, where the primary objective and the government was driven totally on infrastructure development. Now, this is one area where I believe, personally looking back, that we were overexposed to that drive. Now, this is not to say, this is not to criticize what happened. I was very much part of that government, and I will stand up anywhere where I feel that what happened was correct. But there were certain instances where we overspent on infrastructure investment in terms of debt. Now, if you see 80 to 90% of our infrastructure investment is in debt. We have borrowed, mainly from China. And some of these commercial projects that have been taken place during that time with colossal amount of investment has not reaped the commercial benefit or the commercialization process.
You're talking about things like the Matalaya International Airport and the Hamanpata
Basically,
Port.
let's not go to specifics at the moment. Well, we'll come to that when we come there. But this is what has left us in a debt trap, so to speak. Now, when we lost power in 2015, in terms of the foreign exchange reserves, the central bank had almost about $7 billion of foreign reserves, of which I believe about 6 billion was borrowed. Now, then came the Yahapalana government, which undertook a lot of structural reform in the economy. They also had to borrow in the process. And through that structural reform, when they lost power in 2019, there was, I believe, about $7.8 billion in the foreign reserves, but that money was our own money. But having said that, the debt that we have taken from 2010 to then 15 to 2015 to 2019 is what is now yielding.
It is now, this is
It
now
is now
in
due,
play.
mostly 2010, 2015. And then we have up to a total of about $33 billion that we have to settle by 2027. Now, this is where the whole crux of the matter is. Now, in the meantime, as I see it, where the fundamental error, COVID is a situation that the solution to COVID lies in pragmatic economic solutions. It doesn't, in my personal perspective, I am not an economist, but having had the practical experience, I don't think that the solution to COVID lies in the textbook, in sense of the economic situation. Now, instead of tackling the dollar issue that we had or that we have in terms of the dwindling foreign exchange reserves, what did the government do? They went and stopped all imports. Now, that is the first crisis. When there are instruments, when there are other solutions that you can seek, the first thing was stopping all imports. Now, as you may be aware, 85% of our imports, of which only 9.5% are used for commercial, for personal consumption. Everything else is used for trade. You and I, now if I buy these phones, I sell this to someone. That is the cycle of economics. So therefore what happened? Majority part of our people lost their daily income, lost their means of living. The economic activity fell. Government taxes fell. Revenues fell. And immediately the economy shrunk. By virtue of their own doing, the economy has shrunk today.
So is that, would you attribute that as being one of the principal reasons for the dwindling, the plummeting popularity?
Well, I mean, there are so many other factors. Then came the fertilizer, the ban.
Do you think that was a good idea, but wrongly or poorly implemented?
See, if you ask me, how do you approach this? Now, I have studied this matter, how India, especially Kerala, have handled this for organic fertilizer. I mean, moving towards organic fertilizer is an ideal situation. We all agree on that. There is absolutely no argument there. And I think the President is correct in terms of having an objective of achieving that. Now, what should have been done? Now, this organic fertilizer and the suspension of chemical fertilizer is introduced overnight to all the farmers. Now, for us, our farmers are generally people who in traditionally who have 1 acre of land, 2 acres of land, you know.
They're smallholders.
Smallholders basically. But what should they have done? They should have used the cooperative setup. Now, through the cooperative setup in every electorate, you could have had a collective agreement with all the farmers and identify the crop and have a collective agreement where, say, 100 farmers are only doing one crop. Then you can quantify it. You know who is doing what. You have allocation of land. You have allocation of reserves. And yes, through organic fertilizer, if you have even a 40% drop in harvest, even a 50% drop in harvest, then you can quantify and pay them compensation. And do it in a structured manner, district-wise.
However, I just want to interject here, because we now have the benefit of what is proposed in the budget. There doesn't appear to be any allocation of funds to pay this compensation, even though the President and various ministers have said if there is a shortfall, we will pay the difference, hopefully funding it. But what they said at the time, the saving on the cost of importing chemical fertilizers.
So for us now, when you look at the budget is a lot of, it's a good story. I mean, the policy statement of the Honorable Finance Minister that he presented, there are certain areas that I do totally agree with him, that there is reform that is required, and what is black, white is white. There is no grey areas. That aspect you have to give to him. He has understood that in terms of what are the differences in terms of attitude and in terms of mechanisms, in terms of tools that has to be used. But unfortunately, now for example, there is an allocation of about 41,000 million rupees that has been made for organic fertilizer, but that is not specified. Now ideally what should have happened is that mechanism, that tool that is going to be used to compensate the farmers or to propagate that should have been specified in the budget. But unfortunately that is not done. And as you know, the revenue that the budget is totally based on is perceptive revenue. So I don't know, with this contracted situation in the economy, with all these restrictions being there, to what extent we can achieve that revenue.
Do you think, looking for a kind of a short answer really, do you think that the government, whilst the concept of going all organic is good, that this rush to try and do it overnight by banning the imports and so on is a little bit too promising?
Well, it's far from promising, I can say that. No country in the world has achieved it over a short period of span. And I think even Australia, if you take one of the largest countries, it's only 12.3%.
Yes, but
of the output organic.
Apart from 3%, the rest of it is done for their dairy farming.
Exactly.
The grasslands.
Exactly. So I think this was the concept is there, the objective is there, and the president is driven in that. But at the same time, it's a problem of finding $600 million as well, I believe.
Now, let's. I know we are about 3 minutes into a break, but let's start this. You will have a sound understanding of the workings of the inner workings of government. So, how do you think that this has come about? This business about I want to go green, I want organic. What are the chances of them having had the 360-degree sort of discussion on this and getting the consensus of the people who know?
For us, I think there is nothing wrong in wanting to go and do it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. That is the future, that is what we have to go. But there is a pace and there is a mechanism. Now, unfortunately, what I see in this government, what they lack is the divisional secretary systems, the district secretary systems, the administrative systems that are set up.
But they're there, so why
But they are not utilized.
Yes, but why?
They are not utilized.
Is that because of the military background of our president?
Well, I doubt it. I mean, there is no military involvement in terms of agricultural promotion, as I see.
I know, but what I'm saying is our president has a military background, and a person usually with a military background is used to getting things, giving an order and getting it done.
Well, that is true. I mean, they're driven by targets.
Yeah.
But then, when in a political setup, in an administrative setup, in a government administrative setup, things differ.
How far would you agree that our president today is not a political animal?
Well, one doesn't have to be. Perhaps when you look at the history, what we need is a person in the middle, and this president fits that bill in terms of being a person who can be driven towards results. But unfortunately, the implementation is lacking. This is where the issue is, that I see it. I'm very candid about it. It's nothing wrong with the personality. Personality he wants to achieve.
So who's responsible for the implementation?
Well, at the end of the day, it is the government at large. It is the president and the cabinet of ministers
right.
that are responsible for it.
Let's find out after the break whether the division is between the president and his team of ministers. We'll see you on the other side of the break.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali. Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Mr. Sajin Vaas Gunawardena. Politician is the best way of saying who he is, of course. Now then, Mr. Gunawardena, welcome back to the program. We were talking about the implementation of this policy. That leads me to ask you, we have this sort of, shall we say it like this? We had a speech that President Mahinda Rajapaksa, Prime Minister, made at the 5th anniversary of the SLPP. He spoke openly of disunity in the party. That was followed up by a speech made by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who alluded to the same sort of thing. And we then have another speech, a statement made by President Gotabaya, in which he said, look, he berreted the people. He said, look, you vote us in, then you kick us out. Go and find somebody else to vote for. Someone new, he said. How do you see? There is a story here. What's that story in your analysis?
Well, if you are trying to ask me whether there is a division between the Rajapaksas, absolutely not.
Is that true? Are they rock solid?
I don't think.
Is their unity rock solid?
As a family, they are rock solid. I don't doubt for 1 minute whether there is a. And you use the word disunity. Listening to the Prime Minister's speech that day, disunity may not be the right word to use there. What he basically said is change your attitude and live up to the realities of politics.
Who was he lecturing?
Well, obviously the Port Tour. Obviously the majority of the incumbent government. The ministers, the MPs, who everyone is responsible for this wheel to function.
Was there a message to the president too in that?
Well, I suppose one would say, I mean, but of course don't forget the president is aloof from party politics. So you have to differentiate him there. But see, if you see how the Port Tour, the SLPP is functioning today, they are aloof from everything themselves, right? When there is issue, you find the General Secretary of the party coming and lambasting everyone. Right? And then they go back to the being chummy and doing whatever they are doing always. So one has to wonder whether what are they trying to do? Are they trying to exert their authority to say we are the majority, or you exist because of us? You have to toe the line, behave with us, a little whipping, right? So what President Mahinda Rajapaksa, what he basically said was that don't forget that you are in a coalition. Taking a coalition is not easy.
Was he then alluding to the unhappiness of these other 10 component members of that alliance?
Well, it's not only the 10, because the unhappiness of the 10 results in the unhappiness of the majority of the people who voted for them, for their voter base. And where is that going to end up in time to come? What are you looking at in the future? If these problems that are existent now, for example, I was watching the Honorable Finance Minister, and he was saying that this is a war. This is a war, and certain battles you lose. And he drew reference to the Elephant Pass and certain incidents that took place in the war, certain operations where we lost the battle, but we won the war finally. But unfortunately, I'm sad to say, you can't equate those examples when it comes to this economic war that we are fighting. Because when they lose the battle, it is the people, the common man, who ends up in hunger, like what has happened today.
The Rajapaksas have a history of being supported by the rural masses. Perhaps the Colombo 7 types don't have much time for them, but out there they certainly have their vote base. And how do you perceive that? Do you think that these sort of little battles or whatever, the MR speech, GR's rebounder, and GR saying go and find vote somebody new in, do you think all these things actually reach the masses?
Well, of course they do for us. I mean, they reach them for a large extent. But today they are overburdened more by the day-to-day battle that they have to ensure that there's 3 square meals on their plate. You go to the rural areas, you talk to them, you talk to the people, they barely eat 1 square meal today. Because number one is that their daily income is no more. They have no opportunity of earning that money.
But if this government has their ear to the ground, are they not hearing what you're hearing?
Well, unfortunately not. This is where I am also puzzled, because I was a part of that administration at that given time, and we had our ears to the ground always. We were more closer. That is exactly what President Mahinda Rajapaksa said in his Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa said in his speech, that you must go and do politics at the ground level. You must know what is happening there, and you have to find the solution for those problems. See, solutions don't come in textbooks. Solutions come with being with the people, understanding what their issues are. And there must be an administration, there must be a government that listens to that.
Now then, can we move on? Because, of course, Sajin Vaas Gunawardena was a monitoring MP at the Foreign Office. It was said quite often that he was the de facto Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka. Let's find out about the foreign policy challenges that are now taking place around us. Mr. Gunawardena, what do you say? How will Sri Lanka ever resolve this whole business of the suspicion that the UN has about towards the end of the war, the accountability processes and so on?
Faraz, I was not the de facto foreign minister to begin with. I mean, I had a very good relationship.
Were you the foreign minister?
Absolutely not. It's the Honorable G.L. Pires, and I learned a lot working under him.
Good.
Keeping that aside.
Yeah.
You see, we are in a rather quagmire now, because if you look at the current situation in terms of the human rights accountability process, we have had so many instruments that we created on our own. We had the LRRC, we had the Paranagama Commission. All these documents are there, but they are under some carpet and nothing's coming out. And the latest being that the Human Rights High Commissioner Bachelet basically made a statement at the last session that there is a repository of 120,000 cases against us. Whether that is right or wrong is immaterial. I mean, I personally don't believe that one can have 120,000 cases of atrocities that they are talking about. But we don't know the nature of that. We don't understand what it is. It has not been presented. But it is going in a rapid pace. Member countries have funded for the Secretariat, and the Secretariat is taking a quasi-judicial nature. This is where the danger comes for Sri Lanka.
So there's a danger in the making right now?
There is a danger in the... It's already made. It's beyond in the making. Having said that, if I take your memory back to the Yahapalana government, when then under the auspices of the former President Maithripala Sirisena, Sri Lanka subscribed to a process, a joint process, a joint communique was given,
yes.
A joint motion was done, so that they participated in the process. So my view here, my personal view here, is that what we did in the past of ignoring this and keeping it in abeyance and calling it different names and name calling is not going to help us. We have to participate in the process. The form of participation is something that we have to look at and agree, the structure of it. But being aloof from it, we are only going into an abyss that we can't come out of.
An abyss of despair, even.
Well, it might be worse.
Might be worse. Can we, because we're still on foreign policy, just need to quickly ask you this question. It's often been said that there was one single blow which ensured that President Mahinda Rajapaksa would be sent home. And indeed, he was sent home in January 2015. The single blow, how hard was that blow to Dr. Chris Nonis? Did you really whack him?
Well, tell you the truth, Faraz, I mean, I don't like to speak about this now. This is 7 years ago.
Yes.
But since, I mean, you like to dwell in the past so much, there was no such incident. There was argument, obviously. I don't like to bring in the details of it, but there was absolutely no fisticuffs of that nature, right, as reported by the press. And in fairness to Dr. Nonis, he never said anything about it. Neither did I say anything about it. The third parties who created that huge issue. But there was argument between us.
But it resulted in somebody falling off a stool.
Not quite. I mean, one doesn't have to fall off when one is trying to alight it.
Right. Okay.
It's not quite.
Okay.
You know?
All right. Well, that's very diplomatic. But isn't that the blow that sealed the fate of President Rajapaksa?
Well, I don't think so for us personally, because I mean, there were many other issues that surrounded our loss at that time, and this was a very minuscule
What would
issue.
you say? Can you give us a couple of lines on why?
I think the perception of authority, power, corruption to a certain extent, and that perception built over a period of time. And after the euphoria of the victory of the war, we lost our sense of belonging to a certain extent. And
But don't you think that it's almost ironic that after the war, with all that euphoria right throughout the island, you saw people dancing and having kiribat, and right throughout the island. It wasn't just confined to the single areas, the Muslim areas, or whatever. It was right throughout the island. In that euphoria, and then you call for an election. And President Rajapaksa, Mahinda Rajapaksa, only managed to get 58% of the vote, whereas President Kumaratunga, in her first term, she got elected with a record 62%, which hasn't been beaten to this day. Don't you think that there was an anomalous situation between Mahinda Rajapaksa, this very popular man, the war-winning president, only managing to secure 58%? Wasn't there a message from the people there?
well, not quite for us, I would say. I mean, having taken your point, you see, times change, politics change, and that period democracy existed to a great extent. So formidable challenges were there, and getting 58% of the vote at that point of time was a great achievement.
I have to ask you so many questions, which we'll probably do shall we call it a part 2 interview with you. But as we finish today, very quickly, Sajin Vaas Gunawardena, what do you feel? Because you've been through this mill, that's why I'm asking you. You've been through this mill. We have on the one side the Attorney General's Department indicting various people and then going to court, and now the Attorney General's Department is trotting along to court and withdrawing these indictments. Somebody who's suffered the same fate, accepting that you've still got cases going on. How do you view this? Is this the AG's department? Were they politically driven at the time they were putting out those indictments?
See, for us, I have been a victim of that.
Yeah.
There have been 3 cases filed against me. 2 are non-existent now. 1, I'm still going through the process of that indictment, and I won't say too many details because it's in front of court. And in the very near future, I will be proving in court my innocence with documentary evidence to prove it. Now, having said that, there is these withdrawal processes. There is obviously procedure for that. In the penal code, there is a procedure. So I don't understand why that process is not involved. Now, when the Attorney General comes to court and says, we are not proceeding with this case anymore, at times the judiciary does not question why it is so, because I think it is perceived that the Attorney General's Department knows best and they have the judicial process and the power to do that. Now, in my case, I mean, I have not even gone and subscribed to that political victimization committee because I don't want any politics involved in it. How they were instituted and why they were instituted, the whole country knows now. But I believe, I have 1 more case left that is in trial at the moment. I believe that when the details come out, I can prove myself innocent, and I'm having enough confidence to do that.
So you feel that the AG should have just let these cases go ahead and fight
Well,
it
what
out?
I'm saying is there is a process, there is a procedure laid down in the Criminal Procedure Code that if a case cannot be taken forward, you have to make a submission to the respective honorable court, right? And then the court decides whether that whatever argument that you make holds ground or not.
Sajin Vaas Gunawardena, thank you very much for being on Newsline Live. We much appreciate it, and we've certainly enjoyed having you on the program. And we look forward to talking to you again, of course. And that's the way it was on Newsline Live this evening. Take care, and as always, God bless you.